Hello, I'm Claire Smith and welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be me testing out 10 fragrances, 10 hyped up fragrances that were sent to me by my friends here on YouTube. So they've sent me 10 different fragrance samples and I'm just going to tell you whether I'm interested in purchasing a bottle or whether I don't see where the love is coming from. And if I've learned one thing while I've been on YouTube, it's that we all have very different tastes in fragrance. So if you haven't seen me before, I'm Claire Smith and I make videos all about perfume, perfume science, perfume history, perfume psychology, and I also just do some straight perfume reviews and also fun perfume tags. So if that kind of thing interests you and you haven't already done so, then please do consider subscribing and please also like this video if you do like this kind of content. So I just want to say thank you for reaching 14,000 subscribers. I never ever thought that I would even get to 1,000, so this is amazing to me. And I was also interviewed by the Financial Times for an article on discontinued fragrances a couple of weeks ago, and that article came out on Saturday, so I've had a really exciting week. So let's get on with this. What's the first fragrance? So the first fragrance, and in fact the first couple of fragrances are all from Fiona. So this first one is Initio's Musk Therapy. So if you watched my top 10 fragrance lists from influencers that I made a video of a couple of weeks back, you all know that number 2 in those lists was Initio's Musk Therapy amongst a few other fragrances that tied for second place. So Musk Therapy I was really intrigued to try because this is a very hyped fragrance. So I've not tried very much from Initio. I've tried just a few of their fragrances and I always found them to be very loud and punchy. And Musk Therapy, whilst it isn't overtly loud, it is a very long-lasting fragrance and it is still quite punchy even if you think it's quite soft. So Musk Therapy really opens with a slightly citrusy but very soft citrusy musk, but there's also a slight fruitiness in the background for some blackcurrant. It's very, very mild though. I really would say that the musk is the more dominant aspect of the fragrance. It's also slightly sweet. So the musk here actually makes me think of Musk 12 by Kayali. It's that kind of same soft pillowy musk going on. I also find this fragrance to be slightly creamy and also slightly aquatic feeling. And actually as this dries down it seems to get even creamier. I even get sort of reminded of things like coconut. I guess that could be sandalwood. There's nothing here for me that is really to love or to hate. It's something that I find just rather nondescript. So to me there's sort of a shampoo-y aspect to this. It really makes me think of a high-end shampoo. And in that it's very likeable. It's a very easygoing kind of fragrance, but it doesn't make me love it. It's really just a clean musk overall, but it's really got this kind of fruity aspect to it. It makes me think of cooking apple peel in the dry down actually, along with that muskiness. This fragrance, I can see why it's coming out at number 2 because it is likeable. It's very easygoing. You know, shampoo vibes kinds of fragrances are very popular, but this just doesn't say buy me to me. So that's Initio's Musk Therapy. So the second fragrance is one from Diptyque and this is Papier, and I retried this one recently in store before I got this sample from Fiona, and my initial feelings on this one really weren't that positive. I remember feeling quite underwhelmed by it and actually I dismissed it initially about a year ago when I first tried this. Trying it again more recently in store, I was really taken with this one. And actually when I was buying Orpheon, my allegiance was really split between Fleur de Peau, Papier and Orpheon, and I had a hard time deciding which one of the 3 to buy. So I really do like Papier. So this fragrance opens with a soft, polleny, slightly lemony mimosa that feels actually quite savoury, and it gets more savoury as time goes on. And actually, as this starts to dry down, you get more of a pillowy, soft, slightly woody, ricey musk coming in, and the mimosa kind of dies down slightly. I think this one is really quite a simplistic fragrance. When you try and describe it, there's not much to say, but it's just such a lovely experience to wear. And I love the soft, pillowy aspect of it. I love how it wears, and I love how it gives you a nice scent bubble. It's quite soft, but it's really long lasting. And I just think this one is another winner from Diptyque for me. I'm pretty sure out of this one and Fleur de Peau, I'd probably go with Fleur de Peau, but my taste does change on a daily basis basically with those 2 fragrances. I think it just depends on my mood. I feel like this one is maybe the more summery version of Fleur de Peau. I think I'd probably want to wear this one in warmer weather. I think it's quite a nice, gentle fragrance really. I think the thing that really amazes me about this one is that it's so light and airy. It's an EDT formulation. It's not even an EDP, but it's just so long lasting. And I guess that must be some ambroxan, but it doesn't interfere with my enjoyment of this fragrance at all. And I think it's really nicely done, really subtly done. So that's Le Papier by Diptyque. So the next fragrance is from Liis, and this is Peau. So from what I've read, I think this one's their most popular release, and I was really pleased to get to try this. So this fragrance is a warm, woody, slightly powdery, resinous fragrance with a very gentle tobacco in the beginning as well. And the resins here give it a slightly citric aspect, so it smells to me almost like lemon zest almost in the beginning, along with those resins and with the light woody tobacco. The resins really calm down as this fragrance progresses, and the tobacco kind of dissipates a lot, and you're really left with a powdery, warm woodiness. And it makes me think of being wrapped in a blanket, a really thick blanket, in the middle of a forest in a wood cabin. That's really the feeling I get, next to a fire. I think this fragrance is something that I can't see many people hating. It's one of those quite innocuous fragrances, I guess. I can see this one appealing to lots and lots of people. And I do like this one, but I just don't feel like it's exciting me enough to want to make a purchase, I guess. I think if you really like warm, woody, powdery ambers, then this one could be an absolute love for you. Especially if you like things like Ambre Cello by Parfums, if you like things like Jardin's Tiger by Her Side, then this one really might be a love. So that's Liis Peau. So the first sample from Lizzie is Guilty Crush, and it's from the House of Oud. So this is one of those lipsticky fragrances. Initially it smells like ambroxan and also like a fruity lipstick. It's quite a waxy lipstick. And actually, as this starts to dry down, the waxiness does fade back a little bit and it becomes more powdery. But the powderiness is more about the fruitiness. So there's initially a bit of a syrupy cherry, and actually as this starts to dry down, it turns into almost something like a cherry lollipop that's covered in a powdery sweetness. As this dries down further, you get more of the rose and you get a kind of almost sparkly feeling vanilla powder in the dry down. And really the ambroxan really dissipates towards the end of the fragrance, and I actually prefer the dry down much more compared with the opening. I feel like if you really like lipsticky fragrances, if you like lip gloss fragrances, I think particularly if you like Prada Candy Gloss, you might really enjoy this fragrance. But for me, I feel like the ambroxan at the beginning slightly spoilt this for me, and it didn't really recover. I think that the dry down's much nicer to me, and it does have this warm fuzziness in the dry down, which I really like, that aspect of this. But I really do think that this one is one for people who absolutely can't get enough of those lipsticky fragrances. I wouldn't say this is the most lipsticky fragrance I've ever come across, but I definitely did recognise that in the opening. And that glossy lacquer feel in the dry down is really interesting. So this one is Guilty Crush by the House of Oud. The next fragrance is one from Atelier des Ors, and I've got two in this video from that brand, and this is really one that I think got a lot of hype last year or the year before, and it's just something I've never got around to sniffing, and I was really intrigued to see what I thought of it considering all of the hype that I've heard about it. So this one is Pink Me Up, and it really does very literally smell very, very pink. It does smell like a dark pink kind of fragrance. So this is really quite a fruity fragrance. It actually makes me think of the 90s Chewits sweets. If you ever had a Chewits sweet, it's not quite as strong as one of those, but it definitely does have that kind of chewy texture to it almost as well. That sweetness that you get with those Chewits sweets. There's also some florals here, and there's also some patchouli. The patchouli is very distinctive to me, and it gives it a lot of density. It's not powdery, this fragrance. It's quite a smooth fragrance, but it just has this presence, and I think that must be the patchouli. There is also a little bit of ambroxan here, and it does make me think of lacquer, and it makes me think of smoothness. You know, everybody talks about this fragrance, talks about the fizziness of it, and I was really expecting fizziness, and maybe I haven't tried it enough, maybe I just don't smell it like other people. I just don't detect the fizziness, and that kind of disappointed me. I was really waiting for that aspect of it because I absolutely love fizzy fragrances. I think they're really inventive and different and interesting, and I just didn't get the fizziness. This does smell fun and fruity though, and I do pick up on some of the florals in the dry down, so you get more of the rose, and the rose is very definitely pink, and it's not fresh, it's not powdery, it's more of a sweet rose. To me, it also smells like there's some petally white florals here, maybe some gardenia or some magnolia, something like that. Something very creamy and perhaps even a little green. Again, this is a perfectly likeable fragrance. It's very dense without being powdery, I guess is how I'd try to explain it, but I don't think I'm explaining this one very well. It's nice, but it's just not something that's grabbed me. I think probably because of the ambroxan. But yeah, that's Pink Me Up by Atelier des Ors. So the next fragrance is also from Atelier des Ors, and this one is Coco Kimiya, and I was not really sure what to expect from this one. I looked on Fragrantica, there are 2 notes listed, and I thought, oh, this isn't going to be very interesting. How wrong was I? So when I smelt it, there's so much going on in this fragrance, and it's something I've never smelt before. So this opens with a really boozy feel, and it's a really kind of white spirit kind of booze. It smells almost like a white rum, or even something more like even veering towards a vodka or something like that. Pure alcohol, but with a lot of sugary sweetness and perhaps some spices too. The spices are there throughout, and I really struggle to identify them. They actually make me think of when I was little and I'd go and smell some really old spices my mum had in a cupboard, and she never ever used them. And I remember those spices were arrowroot and fenugreek, and that's exactly what this kind of smells like to me. But obviously those spices were old, so maybe I don't know what those spices actually smell like. That's what it makes me think of, those old tins of spices. There's also cardamom here, and it's not a fresh, cool cardamom, it's a warm, fuzzy, enveloping, powdery cardamom. This fragrance has a definite foodie touch to it, and it actually makes me think of roasted or caramelised walnuts. So my dad actually has quite a few walnut trees, and he hates walnuts, so he always gives me all of his walnuts. I remember one year he had this bumper harvest and he collected an entire sack full of walnuts, and I had no clue what to do with them. And I ended up making baklava, but with walnuts. And this fragrance really makes me think of that baklava that I made with those walnuts. It's like the baklava before you've put the honey syrup on the top after you've cooked the phyllo pastry with the sugar and the walnuts. And I just find that delicious. It's a really kind of warm, nutty, roasted, slightly earthy feeling walnutiness. Really distinctive, and something that it took me a long time to figure out exactly what I was smelling. I think the listed note here is cocoa, and I'm wondering whether that's the kind of rich velvetiness that this fragrance has. It's just a really beautiful, very different take on what I would think of as cocoa. It's not the same at all, but it makes me think of the way that Cacao Porcelana by Atelier Materi made me think differently about cocoa pods and cocoa. He just took it in a completely different direction, and this does exactly the same thing with cocoa. It's not chocolatey, and it's not even sweet to me. It's more just that kind of walnutiness and a velvetiness to this. And just those spices throughout just make this so distinctive and so different, so something I haven't smelt before. And that's what I really love about this. There's also, obviously, it's a rendering of cocoa, so they're probably going to use patchouli, aren't they? And yes, there is patchouli here, and I think if you hate patchouli, you won't like this fragrance. I think probably the 2 fragrances that I would say if you like those, you'll probably like this, would be Cacao Porcelana and also Akro Dark, which also has a lot of patchouli. But I think this one's slightly more friendly than Akro Dark. Just something that I think is really distinctive, really well done, and I would absolutely love a small decant of this one. I think this only gets sold in 100ml bottles. But if I had 5ml of this, I would absolutely love to have 5ml of this or 10ml of this. This was also really long lasting and really quite a punchy fragrance. I was really impressed by the longevity of this. So that's Coco Kimiya, and it's by Atelier des Ors. The next fragrance is a fragrance that I've been wanting to sniff, for several years, and I've never come across a sample. I've never sort of bothered to buy a sample, and it's just been something that I've put on the back burner, and I've always had this feeling of, oh, when I come across it, I really want to smell that one. And this one is Montale's Mukhallat. So Montale, I have a love-hate relationship with, because they are very larger than life kind of synthetic fragrances, synthetic feeling. Of course, most fragrances synthetic, but you know what I mean. When something doesn't smell natural is what I'm saying. They're very much that kind of feeling, aren't they, Montale fragrances? And there are some Montale fragrances that I can't get enough of. I find them completely addictive. And then there are others that I just feel I absolutely hate. And this one is so distinctive, so different, so artistic feeling. I feel like this one and the one I just talked about are very artistic fragrances. And you can appreciate them as forms of art, even if you don't particularly enjoy the fragrance profile. And I think that's how I feel about Montale Mukhallat. I'm kind of fascinated by Montale Mukhallat, I think. So this one, I describe it as a plastic smelling strawberry fragrance. It really does make me think of doll's skin. It makes me think of My Little Ponies, actually. I remember when I was little, I had the My Little Pony, I think it was called Cherry Jubilee or Cherries Jubilee. That one, and it had cherries on the horse's bum, on the pony's bum. And this fragrance makes me think of the smell of those My Little Ponies. But it also makes me think of pink soaps in Lush. And it makes me think of bath bombs in Lush. It definitely has a slight soapiness as this dries down, but really the plasticky strawberry and the slight bubblegum feel of this is the thing you get throughout. I just think this one's really fun. I think people describe this quite often as the fragrance that Barbie would wear, and I totally agree with them. It really does make me think of dolls. It makes me think of just pink. It makes me think of Barbie chewing a strawberry bubblegum. It's just a fun one, this one. And I think if you haven't smelt it, it's well worth seeking out and having a sample. You might absolutely hate it, but I think the people who will love this one will not be able to get enough. I think if you really want a fun, very different, you haven't smelt this before kind of fragrance, Mukhallat is definitely the one to go for. Really long lasting as well. Montale longevity, notoriously amazing longevity. So yeah, Mukhallat by Montale. So the next one is another new house to me, and this one is from Nasomatto, and this one is Narcotic Venus. So Narcotic Venus is the most stunning, beautiful tuberose, lily and jasmine fragrance. And lily to me can sometimes be a bit green, it can sometimes be a bit spicy, and this definitely has a greenness and a slight spiciness, but I wouldn't say this is the spiciest lily that I've ever smelt. To me, the tuberose gives this a lot of creaminess, but the lily gives it a slight greenness. I think that balance is really nicely struck. It's quite a sweet fragrance as well, but it is still quite fresh. It really makes me think of an outside wedding. It's got a dewiness to this as well. I wouldn't say it's green, it's more dewy. It's got a watery aspect to it, but it's not aquatic. I think this fragrance just is beautiful, and I think it's one of the best tuberose fragrances that I've smelt. If I didn't have a collection full of tuberose fragrances, then this would be going straight onto my wish list. Really, I think when I finish a few tuberose fragrances or decide they're not for me, this one might be a swap in, I guess. So yeah, really not a lot to say about this one, because if you like white florals, you like white florals. There's not a lot else going on here, but it just is a beautiful fragrance, and I'd really recommend this one. So Narcotic Venus by Nasomatto. So the next one is from Jo Malone, and this one's called Taif Rose. So this fragrance, I was looking at the notes and I was thinking, is this going to remind me of Cafe Rose by Tom Ford, because it has coffee and it has rose? And I have to say, no, it doesn't. And I was quite surprised by that. It actually reminded me more of Intense Cafe by Montale. But obviously it's not as sweet, it's not as powdery, it's not as vanillic. Yeah, it's a very different fragrance even from Intense Cafe. And it was just a momentary kind of recognition for that fragrance. But I think I actually prefer this one to Cafe Rose. This one is slightly fresher. So this really opens with a deep pink rose. So this opens really like a bit of a Turkish light, really, with a Turkish rose. But then there's also sort of a density to this, and I think that's really coming from the coffee. The coffee is not distinctively coffee, it's more the powderiness from the coffee and the kind of richness of the coffee overall. This really doesn't change too much as it goes through its course. It maybe becomes a little bit warmer and it sort of fades back a little bit on the rose. But I would say this is actually quite long lasting for a Jo Malone fragrance, and it's one of the punchier ones I've tried as well. So yeah, Taif Rose, not something that really has excited me, not something that I'm going to rush out and buy, but I did enjoy it and I think it's likeable. So that's a Taif Rose by Jo Malone. So the final fragrance is from John, and this one's called Dries van Noten's Bitter Splash. So I've tried a few from Dries van Noten, and this one actually I found really striking. I think it's something, if you love grapefruit, if you love vetiver, if you like fragrances from Jo Malone, the early ones from Jo Malone, or if you like fragrances like Terre de Hermes, you might really enjoy this one. So this really opens with a red feeling grapefruit. It's definitely a softer grapefruit to begin with, and then it becomes slightly more bitter and slightly more yellow as it goes on. It becomes more citrusy in a way. There's definitely some texture from the orris, but I wouldn't ever say it's what I would think of as a leather or a suede. It's something in between. It's sort of not as strong as leather, but it's not as powdery as suede. It's more like a smooth suede fragrance, this one. But there's definitely a big input from the vetiver, and there's also a bit of greenness here. This is not a sunny, bright grapefruit kind of fragrance. This is more of a bitter and serious kind of fragrance to me. I actually think this is really well done. I really do like those Jo Loves fragrances. I don't own any, and I don't feel like I want any in my collection because I know I'm just not a citrus kind of person. But I think if you are, this is a really nice fragrance and this is really well done. So that's Bitter Splash by Dries van Noten. So that's the final fragrance in this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, then please press the like button and please also consider subscribing if you haven't done already. And please let me know, what do you think of these fragrances? Have you tried any of them? Do you own any of these fragrances or any from these particular houses? I'd be really interested to know what you think I should be trying next from these houses or from any other house. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.